So you have stumbled onto one of my many soapboxes, but one of if you think about the interactions we have every day, so many of us work remotely. We move around, we move through the day, and almost everyone we interact with professionally, whether it's at the gas station or the grocery store or whatever, it is this dance. It is this dance of predictability and
Right.
conformity and the lowest stakes, most superficial nonsense communication. How are you doing? Good. You? Yep, good. How's this weekend? Nice, looking good. Well,
Or
just
the weather.
yeah, the weather, sports, no depth, no connection, no veracity to any of it.
Right.
And to be sat in a room with someone who says, how are your relationships? How is your health? How is your personal growth? What can I help you to do to be a better human, leave a more lasting legacy? This is something where we are so lucky as an industry to be proximal to people's hopes and dreams.
Right.
And for us to ignore them and talk about Sharp ratios or something is so silly and such a misapplication of trust and resources.
This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sivarajan, and welcome to the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Daniel Crosby, a psychologist, behavioral finance expert, and best-selling author whose work bridges the gap between money and meaning. Daniel's insights into why we make the financial choices we do and how we can do better have reshaped the way advisors approach wealth management. With best-selling books like The Behavioral Investor, The Laws of Wealth, and his latest, The Soul of Wealth, he's a leading voice in helping us understand not just the numbers, but the emotions and values behind them. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Sam, that may be the best intro I've ever received. Look at you. This is incredible. Thank you.
Well, you're very kind, and I'm very, very excited to have you on the show. Now, you explore the intersection of psychology and finance with books like the ones that we've mentioned, including your latest, The Soul of Wealth. Can you share for the audience a bit about your own journey, what drew you to this field, and perhaps how your work has evolved over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I am a clinical psychologist by education, and I went to school initially to be a psychotherapist. My dream and my ambition was to be a clinical counselor, lay down on the couch and tell me about your mom kind of shrink. And I was 23 years old when I started that, Sam. And I think that if you can think back to when you were 23, maybe you were more mature than me, but it isn't a prime time in life to be giving people life advice about how to live their lives. And so very quickly, I candidly burned out. I was taking my work home with me. It was enormously heavy. It's very important work. I'm so grateful for psychologists out in the world, but it's heavy work. And I was young and had bad boundaries. And so I was burning out pretty badly. And I went to my dad, who is what was and is a financial advisor. And I said to him, Dad, like, I love studying human behavior. I absolutely adore it. I was meant to do this, but I don't know that I was meant to do this in a clinical context. And I said, are there non-medical applications of psychology? And he said, well, there's a ton of psychology in my work, which shocked me at the time. Because in my mind, my dad was one half sales guy and one half stock picker. Like in my imagination, that is sort of what he did. Pick good stocks and gather assets. And his comment pointed me down a path. Now, this is whatever, 17 years ago. My dad did not know what behavioral economics was. My dad
Right.
had never uttered the word behavioral finance as a wirehouse advisor in Alabama, right? But he knew that there was a lot of psychology in the work. And so that comment from him pointed me down this path to discover the Kahnemans, Tversky's, Thaler's, and other bright lights, and to realize that there weren't a lot of people translating between the ivory towers of academia and folks like my dad who were working, in an everyday capacity with real men and women, boots on the ground, people with real lives. And I thought there was an opportunity there to be sort of a translator between folks much smarter than me and then the people doing the work.
So you've not looked back since. So I think that was great advice by your father. And it is funny, right? How the industry and the field has evolved in that time period. As you said,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that too many people 15, 20, 25 years ago would have understood the concept of investor psychology or behavioral economics. And now I think it's become part of the toolkit of every, top advisor, is at least to kind of give thought as to, what might be going on behind the scenes for their clients, and how they might be better able to help them manage their emotions and their day-to-day financial decisions.
I feel so lucky to have been around during this formative time because you're right. I mean, I remember pitching my first client. They did end up becoming a client, but I came to them with this whole deck about behavioral economics and how I could help them, revolutionize their business. And they were just like, this is not a thing. We have never
Hmm.
heard of this. And then I think you'd be very hard pressed to find an advisor who wasn't at least considering and implementing these things in a small way. And then if you think about the future, I mean, people, auspicious groups like McKinsey in their Wealth Management 2030 survey, they say effectively this is where the whole industry is headed. Like
Right.
that financial advisors are effectively going to be life coaches that happen to know how to run a financial plan in the future, and that the human part will come first and that the financial part will be deeply secondary.
Well, I think you and I, for vested interest, probably that viewpoint of McKinsey resonates. But your latest work, in my view, takes this to the next logical step, and I think it's interesting. Right, we're not going from just what emotions and the human side of it. We're going to I would almost argue, the deeply aspirational side of the human element, right? Where you're talking about the profound connection between money and meaning. And it's a topic that resonates deeply with me. But I'm curious as to what inspired you to explore this particular subject at this particular time, and perhaps how you hope that in writing that book, you hope to reshape the conversation around wealth and financial planning.
Yeah. So if you look at the growth of behavioral finance, it has by and large mimicked the growth of psychology more broadly. And if you think about the early days of psychology, you have the Freuds of the world telling you why you're sad or broken or depressed. And in the early days of behavioral finance, you have this cataloging of all the ways we deviate from perfect rationality,
Right.
which was necessary to achieve a break with traditional economics. And so we had all these things like, oh, you're so silly, you're so stupid, you're so bad with money. And for years, that was the message. That's what behavioral finance was longer and longer lists of how you get it wrong. But if you look at, starting in the mid 90s, it was not until the mid 90s that psychology broadly started to see the work of folks like Martin Seligman,
Right.
who said, let's study positive psychology. Instead of just studying what makes people sad or depressed, let's study what makes a great leader, what makes a great boss, what makes a happy human. And you see his work and others' work around positive psychology. That's where I think behavioral finance is headed. Yes, we need to keep people out of their own way. That's part of it. That's part of the work of an advisor, is to keep people from tripping over their feet and getting in their own way and making these big behavioral blunders. But once we've secured that, once we've figured that out, how do we help them put together lives of purpose and meaning, which is much harder and much more aspirational? In terms of why now, there were two things. There was a micro happening and a macro happening. The
Mm-hmm.
micro happening we can talk about at length if you'd like, but long story short, I thought I was dying and I was not. So I had a moment that I write about in the book where I was very concerned about my health, and it ended up being nothing. But in this moment, I was in a lot of pain and there was a lot of uncertainty. And I, a guy who loves money, loves money, like thinks about it, writes about it, dreams about it, saves it, invests it. I would have given you every single dollar I had
Right.
for answers to my questions and an assurance that I was going to be okay. So it was the first time in my life where money felt very, very small to me, and it made me want to write about life and not money. The second thing is a macro thing, which is when the US was founded, right? Sorry for my US centrism here. When the US was founded, 85% of the world lived in poverty. 85% of the world was living on what is today $2 or less per day. Shocking.
Right.
Everyone was poor effectively. Today, that number is 9%, and it is continuing to fall because capitalism has created a global middle class, and the world has never been richer. And yet, you look in the richest places in the world, North America, right? For instance, most people my age and younger say that they're lonely.
Yep.
The modal number of friends that an American male has is 0.
Yep.
We are richer than we've ever been, and we are despondent. We are richer than we've ever been, and it is not making us happy. And so at the macro level, I said, look, the world needs some ideas about how to bridge this gap between material abundance and the psychological poverty that we're now experiencing.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. We'll dive into that a bit. I think the point that you made about health, it's I'm glad to hear that it's was nothing serious, but I think it's a journey that many of us can probably relate to. And I think as I get older, it's only now that the wisdom of the saying kind of makes sense to me. It's that in your 20s, we sacrifice our time and our health to chase money. And perhaps it's only in the 50s that you would want to sacrifice your money for health and time.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that equation only works one direction, right? And we don't really understand that until later time.